Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Forestry Commission's second public webinar on the England Woodland Creation Offer, or Yuko for short. My name is Annie Weddell. I'm one of the Incentive Development Managers within the Yuko team, and I'll be the facilitator for today's webinar. Before we get started, just a quick note on housekeeping. We expect the presentation to run for about an hour. That's including some breakpoints for Q&A as we go. We then hope to have plenty of time for further Q&A at the end too. To ask a question, simply click on the Q&A icon in the top right-hand corner of your screen and then type your question in the text box that appears. We have staff on hand who will be responding to questions in the chat as we go, and then we'll take breaks to verbally address any unanswered questions at those points. We hope this event is as interactive as possible, so we'll do our best to answer all questions. However, if we don't manage to get to yours, then please do email it to us. The address is on the screen here and will be presented at the end too. Please be aware that your questions will be published and therefore visible to all attendees. However, you can tick a box to ask anonymously should you wish. Finally, we are recording this webinar and we'll share it later on. So without further ado, I shall pass you over to the Yuko team manager, Alec Rhodes, to present our new and exciting offer to you.
Great stuff. Thanks very much, Annie. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us this morning. Okie doke. So, as Annie says, we're going to run through the England Woodland Creation Offer. So we're going to start off by setting out how the offer sort of stacks up, what it looks like overall. Then we'll look in a bit more detail at the payment structure. We'll quickly touch on a bit of a generic example to try and sort of give you a flavour of how the offer might work for you. We'll then talk in a bit more detail about the eligibility and some of the rules that go with Yuko before we sort of close with a final question and answer session. And as Annie says, we'll pause for some questions as we work through the slides. So just to sort of set the scene, the England Woodland Creation Offer, Yuko, it's part of our a wider offer that we're developing in the Forestry Commission alongside DEFRA and our delivery partners to deliver a significant policy aim for woodland creation. And at the UK level, that's taking woodland creation up to 30,000 hectares a year by the end of this Parliament. So that's May 2024. And in England, our aim is to at least treble woodland creation rates by the end of this Parliament. So that's a move from around just under 2,500 hectares a year to at least 7,000 hectares a year. So the England Woodland Creation Offer is a key tool that we hope will help us achieve that challenging aim. It is called Yuko, but it is part of wider work that we're doing, as I say, to look at our regulatory approach to woodland creation and to develop some tools to help applicants through the grant decision-making process. So which grant is the best option for land managers who are thinking about woodland creation. This is sort of only the second time that we've presented Yuko externally, and in preparing for this, I sought some advice from our promotion engagement lead, and they said lots of pictures are important. And so this is an attempt to sort of illustrate Yuko, really. So we hope it's a flexible offer that supports a range of woodland types, so like this leaning birch tree, and we hope it's more supportive and better reflects the true costs of woodland creation. So that's where it's hard to see, but you've got that flexible leaning birch tree and that supportive oak in this picture. So hopefully that will come across in this presentation, the flexibility and the greater levels of support that Yuko will provide. It's still a new offer, and it's amazing how many little glitches and unforeseen sort of consequences you find only when you put something out into the real world. So we know we have a little bit more work to do to develop and improve the scheme, and we are finding those little glitches, and we're at the moment working to correct and refine them as quickly as we can. So please be aware of that. I think please do always check back to gov.uk for the latest versions of the guidance and application forms, because we will continually improve them. And please, yeah, bear with me today if I can't answer all of your questions, but we will, as Annie said, we'll take things away, and you can always email us for more information. Okay, so I'm sort of set the scene really with the policy aim and the policy aims for woodland creation. And they sort of now are sort of enshrined in the 25-year environment plan and the actions that we have in the England Trees Action Plan. And they all recognise the multiple benefits woodlands provide, trees and woodlands provide. I guess Yuko is more of a woodland creation scheme. But we've got policy ambitions for nature recovery, so putting trees and woodlands as a core part of the nature recovery network. We know that trees in the right trees in the right place, along and near rivers and within water catchments, present opportunities to improve water quality and to alleviate flooding. And specifically where planting alongside watercourses, they can provide connecting habitats and shade on water, which can improve aquatic habitats as well. I think we've also seen through the COVID pandemic that the value that people place on being able to get out and about and access the countryside. So we want more people to have access to and benefit from trees and woodlands in their day-to-day lives, and we hope that the Yuko offer will help encourage that. So those are our sort of overall rather ambitious policy aims, but we know trees and woodlands do deliver those things. And as I say, we hope that the scheme is more flexible and supportive, so it supports a wider range of woodland types and sizes than perhaps before. And as I say, supportive in terms of better reflecting the true costs to land managers creating woodland, but also recognising the value of those public benefits that trees and woodlands provide. So just to give an overview of how the grant offer stacks up, there are several layers to it, and I guess this sort of, again, it's a bit like a shallow triangle, and hopefully again this shows the flexibility within the scheme and how supportive it can be depending on what your aims are for your land or your client's aims are. So the first sort of level is support for standard costs. So support for the capital items and activities that you need to do to create a woodland. There's up to £8,500 per hectare for those activities. The next layer to be aware of is that the scheme is compatible with the basic payment scheme, so you can, where you're eligible, you can continue to claim BPS on eligible land planted under Yuko. The third tier is annual maintenance payments at £200 per hectare per year, and these are paid for 10 years. So again, here, as we've done in our previous grant support, recognising it's not just about planting trees, there needs to be an element of maintenance to make sure that they actually establish. So it's really about tree establishment. That's what our end goal is through this grant, to make sure we've got a new established woodland. And then we get to sort of the narrower top of the support structure, really. So we also have support for the actual cost activities. So these are contributions to infrastructure to either manage the woodland or to install recreational facilities. The next level, similar, sort of just possibly a slightly narrower focus, is the additional contributions, and this is where we hope that Yuko is significantly different and can make a real difference in delivering our policy aims. There's the potential here for a further £8,000 per hectare on top of the standard costs and the annual maintenance payments and the actual cost support, and we'll talk about those in a bit more detail as we move into the slides. And of course, on top of that, you've got potentially private finance. So perhaps timber production is the aim, There could be carbon payments. Those carbon markets seem to be developing, as are new opportunities for finance through ecosystem services. So overall, hopefully, we feel that Yuko hopefully will stack up as an attractive offer to help land managers consider woodland creation. So the next few slides, I'm just going to sort of get into a bit more detail about the payment structure. So starting with the standard costs, and you may be familiar with these. As I say, they're support for capital items and activities. And if you are familiar with standard costs, you'll perhaps use them in countryside stewardship or the Woodland Carbon Fund. We provide a sort of set list of standard costs for you to choose from, and you select them and put them into your application. For Yuko, we've extended the menu of standard costs that's previously been available with some new activities, and you can see a full list of those in the grant manual. Standard costs are also they're based on what we understand to be the national average for an item or an activity. That's sort of the overall rate, and then usually the grants are set at an intervention rate, so we pay a proportion of that standard cost. And for Yuko, we'll be paying 100% of the standard cost. So 100% of the national average we understand applies for those activities or items. But there is a cap, so we can only go so far with those payments, and there's a cap of, on average, £8,500 per hectare, and that excludes the other payment elements that we'll talk about in a minute. But just for comparison, that is an increase on the cap that's applied under countryside stewardship, and that reflects that move to the 100% intervention rate. I should also just make a point here that while the payment will be capped, we still may expect activities that are not paid for to be undertaken. So, for example, if we feel that certain items or activities are needed to ensure the woodland establishes that go beyond that 8,500, your Yuko grant agreement will require them, even though our payment will be limited to the 8,500. The maintenance payments, as I mentioned, they're paid for 10 years. They're paid annually and will start to be paid once the capital work are complete, and they're paid at a rate of £200 per hectare. Agreements will have a 15-year obligation period that will apply after the capital works complete. So there'll be a further 5 years after the maintenance payments have run their course for you to maintain the woodland and ensure it continues to establish. So just to be aware of that. I mentioned the compatibility with the basic payment scheme, and we worked closely with the RPA and DEFRA to enable this in this design of Yuko, but it's business as usual if you're familiar with the current setup that allows BPS to be claimed with woodland creation schemes, and so the land needs to have been used for a claim under the single payment scheme in 2008. And through the work to develop Yuko and ensure that compatibility, we have picked up on a slight sort of nuance on the rules, and that is that state-owned land is not eligible to continue to get BPS unless it's managed by a private body. So just to be aware of that, if your clients or you're advising on state-owned land, there may be some limitations on accessing the basic payment scheme once it comes into Yuko. And thanks to RPA, we've updated the basic payment scheme manual to reflect these changes this year. And you can also read our operations note. Operations note 42 sets out all the details of how all of our woodland grants interact with the basic payment scheme. And you can view that by going to gov.uk and searching for operations note or operations note 42. And you'll see that there in the details. Okay, the next strand to talk about is on the actual cost items. So we recognise there are some activities where it's hard to provide standard costs. The costs can be so variable that we can't really manage them that way. And so we have actual cost support for infrastructure for woodland management or for recreation. The infrastructure for woodland management, we will pay 40% intervention rate on the actual costs, but again, that's capped at 10% of the total capital cost, or 5% of the available fund, whichever is the lesser of the two. If you're applying for infrastructure for woodland management, so roads and timber stacking areas, for example, we need, when you make your application, to understand if that infrastructure is going to be installed under permitted development rights, or if full planning permission will be needed. So that will be a process you need to check with a local planning authority. And the reason we need to understand that is that if permitted development applies, we have to consider the impact of any forest roads under the environmental impact assessment regulations. And we will do that as part of processing the Yuko application. But as I say, we need to just understand that planning position when we get your application, so we know whether we need to go through that process or not. For recreational infrastructure, we would pay 100% of the costs, but again, it is subject to capping, so it might not be 100% ultimately. Again, capped at that 10% of the total capital cost of your application, or 5% of the available fund. There's a list of the items that we will fund in the grant manual, and all of the items should follow all accessibility standards, and there's a link to more information on that in the grant manual. The way our support for the actual cost items works is that we require applicants to provide 3 quotes, and we will review those quotes, and we will select the one that we feel is the best value, which typically will be the cheapest, but we will look at the specification and the work that's proposed in the quotes. And that's how we will award the support and determine the payment. You need to record and collect receipted invoices or bank statements, and also have photos of the completed work, so that we know what's been paid for when, and that work is done. Okie doke. Okay, so onto the additional contributions, and as I say, this is where we've worked really hard to what we think is create a bit more of an innovative and hopefully more appealing grant offer. And the additional contributions are a contribution to the value of a public benefit that the woodland will create or provide. We hope that they will incentivise woodland creation with the right design and in the right place that delivers as many public benefits as possible. So basically, the eligibility for these payments is based on the location of your scheme and the design, and it's determined at the subcompartment or compartment level. So we'll be looking at how each individual compartment in the woodland scheme is designed and located to be eligible for these payments. They're optional, so you don't have to take them, and they're also stackable. So where you are in a location that can deliver multiple benefits, and the design is such that it will provide those multiple benefits, then you can get multiple additional contributions on the same piece of land. And we will pay additional contributions as a lump sum once the capital works are complete. So this is an outline of those additional contributions. We've got additional contributions for nature recovery. There are 2 rates for these. We have a higher rate. Well, first of all, I should say they're both focused on creating new native woodland. There's a higher rate where you'll be extending existing native woodland, a lower rate where the new woodland won't be connected to existing woodland, but it still meets the requirements for new native woods, so it has the right species mix for that. You can also get the lower payment rate if you're in a priority area for red squirrel and the species mix is such that it will provide good habitat for red squirrels. So those 2 rates apply for nature recovery. Just to note that on any piece of land you will only get one of those payment rates. You would not be able to stack the higher and the lower rates for nature recovery. We then have 3 additional contributions that relate to water. So we have payment for water quality. So this is targeted in areas where there's diffuse pollution and where woodland creation can help reduce that through either land use change or buffering, providing a buffer between pollution sources and water courses. We have payment for flood mitigation. So again, sort of looking at priority areas where there's high risk of flooding and where woodland creation either on the floodplain or the wider catchment can help reduce that. We also have a payment for riparian buffers. So this is you're eligible for this where you're planting within 10 metres of a watercourse, and we'll pay this up to 50 metres from that watercourse. You need to be planting purely native species here. So where the new native woodland design allows for some non-natives to be planted, for this additional contribution it must be all native species, and the aim here is to create dappled shade on top of the watercourse to cool the water at summer water temperatures and improve aquatic habitat. So we have those 3 payments for water improvements. And then we have 2 payments for social benefits. The first is simply by creating woodlands close to people. And a second where you're creating woodlands close to people, but also prepared to provide access, at least permissive access for 30 years, you can secure a higher or an additional contribution that would stack. So just to give a bit of an example of the stacking, some of these additional contributions automatically stack on top of one another. So, for example, the design requirements of the riparian buffer payment mean that I think you will always get either the higher or lower nature recovery payment on top of the riparian buffer payment. And similarly, for those social supplements, they share common design requirements and common targeting for their location. And so those 2 payments will stack together. So where you're prepared to provide recreational access, you'd get the 2,200 as well as the £500 per hectare. We also in Yuko recognise the value that woodlands can provide in terms of improving air quality. There's no payment for this, but it is supported through the targeting of the scheme and through the scoring system. So where you're planting a woodland that can help improve air quality, and the location is you're in a location that will put those trees in a place to help sites of special scientific interest that are sensitive to nitrogen enrichment, then you can have extra points for your scheme. So just to be aware that there's that recognition of the benefits that trees and woodlands provide in terms of air quality, but it is targeted geographically with a view to protecting those triple SIs. There is no payment or additional contribution for carbon. That's because we want to encourage and support registration through the Woodland Carbon Code and potentially through that the Woodland Carbon Guarantee. And we hope and we understand that those markets are developing, and our Yuko application form is designed to collate the information that can help you make a registration under the Woodland Carbon Code. So that's why we don't have support in here for a carbon payment. Okay, so to just try and look at how this sort of might work to a degree in a real world situation, if we take a piece of land somewhere in England, we look across this area, and I should say thanks to one of our woodland officers in the southwest for helping to draw together this example. But if we look at that area of land and how it relates to the different additional contributions, you can see that across it there's potential for the nature recovery payments at both the higher and lower rate. So you can see there the dark khaki shading, just reflecting where you could get the higher rate for planting and extending existing woodlands. You can see that there's potential to get the additional contribution to alleviate flood risk in some parts of the land. The whole area is eligible for the water quality additional contribution. It's all in the high priority spatial area for that. There are also areas that are eligible for the riparian buffer payment. And here, I guess, just to be clear that these riparian buffer additional contributions, they would just apply to planting that's within 10 metres of the watercourse and up to 50 metres back from the watercourse. And that is actually now reflected in this spatial layer, which you can see. You can see all these spatial layers on the land information search. So if you go to gov.uk, search for land information search, you can view different areas of land and put these layers on to see how they overlay land that you're advising or managing. But again, potential in some of these areas for that riparian buffer payment. And also for the two social supplements there, so £500 for creation of woodlands close to people, a further 2,200 if permissive accesses will be provided, so up to £2,700 per hectare for those payments. The eligibility, I should say, sorry, the eligibility, as I say, it's based on the subcompartments, and any subcompartments that touch these different spatial layers, that determines their eligibility. So they just have to touch these layers to be eligible. And so I guess the outcome of this, to sort of summarise, is that there are different opportunities for additional contributions in different areas, obviously, but that could be across the same land holding. So in this situation here, you can see across a single land holding, there's quite a range of potential additional contributions there. So I guess hopefully, you know, that this approach makes woodland creation more of an option for land managers, and they can look at their land holding and see where these grants stack up and where they might be able to put woodland in the right place and with the right design to deliver these benefits. So it's hopefully helps their decision making. But as I say, it's checking on that land information search to check the eligibility in terms of location, and then looking at the grant manual to understand the basic design requirements that are needed to make sure that the new woodland will function in a way that delivers the benefit. Okay, just a couple more slides to try and illustrate this a bit further before we break for some questions. And I know we recognise we need to develop some more realistic scenarios, but for the purposes of illustration, and as I say, just to take this a bit further, we know that land managers need to consider the sort of complete costs of woodland creation. So, you know, the opportunity costs and income forgone, as well as the actual cost of the capital items and activities. So in terms of the scales here, if we look at National Farm Business Income data and the average income for farms, that's sort of one thing in terms of looking at that and what the income would be. And in this example, we're sort of thinking here about the income over a 30-year period. We've sort of stripped basic payment scheme out of this, though, because you can continue to claim basic payment scheme under land planted in Yuko, so that applies on both sides of the scales. So that's, I guess, the opportunity cost of the land, that farming income. Then on top of that, obviously, there's as I say, the capital costs of planting and managing the woodland. Well, hopefully with our shift to 100% intervention rate, that sort of scored out. So obviously recognise that those are national averages, and so they won't always cover all the costs, but hopefully they make a much more significant contribution to those costs. So if we score those items out, hopefully we're just tipping the balance towards woodland creation. And then on top of that, on the other side of the scales, we've got those other layers to the payment. So we've got the additional contributions, which could range from £400 to £8,000 per hectare. That £8,000 per hectare is it's probably unlikely that you'd be in a position to get that in many cases, but there's the potential there for possibly some parts of land to achieve that. Then you might have your timber income, so maybe you get some income from first thinnings in that first 30-year period that we're making this comparison on. And then maybe also there'll be some carbon income through the Woodland Carbon Guarantee or perhaps some private finance for carbon. And as I say, it does appear that the carbon markets are picking up a little bit, and I believe the prices from the last Woodland Carbon Guarantee were around £15 per offset credit. As I say, so hopefully this is starting to show that, you know, with Yuko over that first 30-year period, woodland could be something worth considering. And then sort of a further slide to look at this, and again, sort of looking at the national farming income information and incomes over 30 years. If you look at how things compare for different types of farm business, and I know there's a lot of questions here, so we don't know all the detail of SFI, but if we assume it won't work too much like BPS, and also I know we've not probably accounted for the costs of carbon verification under the carbon code here, and we're making assumptions about timber prices, but despite that, and we know we need to provide some more detail and examples, but you know, in terms of a sort of overall high level analysis, we can see that Yuko, even with a lower payment rate in terms of additional contributions, where you've got some income from carbon and timber, is potentially a more attractive option than many types of farming system, and that the case is stronger, obviously, as you can access more additional contributions. Though of course it never quite stacks up with the average income from grazing livestock. So we know that, you know, we can only go and we can only make an offer that's attractive in certain situations. But as I say, hopefully this is just giving an indication that perhaps woodland creation could work on some parts of a land holding. It could become more of a viable offer, a viable option, sorry. Okay. One of the expectations with the award of the funding for Yuko is that we encourage private finance as far as we can, and we will be looking at how we make sure that we develop Yuko in a way that doesn't constrain private finance. It's quite challenging at the moment because I think those markets for private payments for ecosystem services are still developing. So what we've tried to do with Yuko's design is make it as flexible as possible, so that you've got a framework here where you can swap out additional contributions to take private finance if that's going to be a more financially attractive option for a land manager. So as I say, we need to encourage private finance. That's an expectation of the grant award, of the funding award, and we do that through the scoring. We encourage that through the scoring system, which we'll look at later. As I've mentioned, the additional contributions don't restrict the potential to generate timber income or carbon income. Obviously, where carbon's concerned, you still need to be able to show your scheme meets the additionality requirements that apply. But there is a principle here that while our additional contributions are a contribution to public benefits, there's an expectation also that we're bringing in private finance to reduce the burden on the taxpayer. So where private finance is used for a particular public benefit during the Yuko agreement or in advance of it, we would not expect to be paying that additional contribution. So you can't mix private finance and Yuko additional contributions for the same public benefit. But you can opt out of additional contributions. You can take, as I say, if you can get private finance, say for flood risk payment, then you can do that and still take up any other additional contributions you might be eligible for. And you can opt out of additional contributions right up until you make your final capital claim. So just trying to leave as wide a window as possible for people to access private finance if they can. And then once our Yuko grant agreement ends, then land managers can seek further finance for those benefits, as long as obviously they'll have to meet any relevant additionality requirements to enter markets to sell those benefits after the Yuko agreement has ended. So still some work to do in this area, but as I say, our intention is that we don't constrain private finance, and that Yuko is as flexible as possible to allow land managers to access private finance where that's possible. Okay, I think you've heard enough from me. Thanks for bearing with me. I'll pause there and hand back to Annie in case she's got any questions to pick up on.
Great, thanks, Alec. So we've had lots and lots of questions in the chat, and Rachel is doing a fantastic job at working through them, but we do have a few for you at this point in time. So I'm going to start off with an early question. George Eustace has said that new plantings will be predominantly native broadleaves. Has this translated into any numerical target regarding the balance between creation of native broadleaf woodland creation and productive plantations?
Okay, so yeah, thanks, Annie. We don't have a target. There's certainly a huge amount of interest in the types of woodland that the scheme is creating, and so while there is no target, we will be tracking the types of woodland that are created and looking to see what the mix is. I think at the moment the majority of schemes are predominantly native through our grant schemes, and I think there is an expectation that will probably continue. But we've tried to design Yuko in a way that, while it incentivises the creation of new native woodland, so for example through those nature recovery payments, there's still a grant offer there for all types of woodland creation.
Fantastic, thank you. Okay, question number 2. Does the private finance tier include biodiversity net gain as well?
So we're keeping in touch with DEFRA on the development of biodiversity net gain, and we will we're hoping and anticipate that Yuko will be compatible with biodiversity net gain. That's our aim. So I guess how we would probably see that working is where a Yuko scheme is eligible to provide a biodiversity net gain sort of credit, if you like, that could be used instead of our nature recovery additional contribution. We've still got probably a bit of work to do to get through the detail of that, and I think the metrics for biodiversity net gain are still in the final stages of coming together. But yeah, our intention is that Yuko can be compatible with biodiversity net gain.
Lovely, okay. Next question. Are the additional contributions made as a one-off payment upfront or when?
Yeah, so we'll pay the additional contributions as a lump sum, and we'll pay them once the capital works are done. So when you make your final claim for planting or fencing, or whatever the final activity might be, yeah, that would trigger the payment for the additional contributions, and they're so they're not quite upfront, but they're made early on as a lump sum payment once you've planted the woodland.
And final question for now. So this seems to be too good to be true. So I get up to 8,600 for my capital costs, then an additional lump sum that doesn't require anything but being in a spatial layer.
Yeah, could it be too good to be true? I guess I hope so. I mean, so yes, the standard cost items, there's a cap of 8,600 for those. Then you can get the additional contributions on top of that. There's two things to be aware of there, though, that they're spatially targeted, as we've sort of just quickly looked at with those example maps, but there are also design requirements that you need to follow as well that are set out in the manual. So those will relate to things like the species mix that you use and the stocking density, and they're all there. They've all been developed with our policy and research leads to make sure that the woodlands that are being created are designed and will function in a way that delivers that public benefit. And as I said, this is all about woodland establishment, so there'll be a 15-year obligation period once you've completed the capital works and those trees, and that woodland needs to be maintained, and so it establishes over that period. But yeah, hopefully, as I say, it's an appealing offer, and if you can get those trees established, yeah, hopefully we'll all benefit from those benefits it can provide.
Fantastic, thank you, Alec. That's all for now.
Okay. All right, thanks Annie. Thanks for what you're doing in the background, Rachel. So is it too good to be true? I guess there is always a little bit of a sting, isn't there? And this is perhaps some of the sting. So it's a bit like Spider-Man's uncle said, that with great power comes great responsibility. And I'm afraid it's the same with grant funding. When grant funding funds are awarded by the Treasury and DEFRA Finance, then we have to have rules and controls that show that those grants are being used effectively and delivering value for money. And so the next section, we're just going to sort of talk through some of those eligibility requirements. And hopefully you'll still see it's too good to be true, but you do need to be aware of the rules. So in terms of eligibility, the first one's maybe a bit obvious, but the land needs to be in England. So if you have applications that span the national borders, then we'd only pay Yuko on the area that's in England. We have a minimum application area of 1 hectare, and that can be made up of blocks, sort of discrete blocks that are at least 0.1 hectare in area. We would usually expect the minimum width to be 20 metres, and that's to align with the national definition of woodland. It has an expectation of at least 20 metres width for to be defined as woodland. But we know in some cases there are benefits from narrower planting, so we would drop that potentially down to 10 metres for shelter belts and those riparian buffers that I mentioned. There's no maximum application or block size at the moment, so you know, we've got ambitious targets, so the larger the schemes, the better. Initially, at the moment, though, we can only award grant agreements that will require the work to be completed and claimed by the end of March 2023. There was an error in the guidance when it was first published. And I'm afraid, yeah, just to clarify that any agreements we offer at the moment the work would need to be completed and claimed by the end of March 2023, and that has been updated in our grant manual, so you can see that. And as I say, please always do check gov.uk for the latest information. We will accept joint applications, so where multiple land managers want to come together to apply, that's great, but they will need to agree who the lead applicant is, and the lead applicant will have the Yuko agreement, and they'll be responsible for dispersing the funds and for any remedial action should things go wrong. So there's a bit of responsibility there, but as I say, we do encourage joint applications for woodland creation at a landscape scale. The land needs to be free of existing grant schemes. So yeah, we need to know that there's no conflict in terms of how the land is being managed at the moment and what payments are being paid there. At the moment, we are working very hard and very closely with DEFRA and Natural England and the RPA to look at how we can introduce some more flexibility to bring land that is in environmental stewardship schemes into Yuko. At the moment, though, if you wanted to move land from an ES or a CS agro-environment scheme into Yuko, there would be a recovery made on the land. And as I say, we're just working through the details of that at the moment to see if we can introduce some more flexibility to allow that without recovery. But I don't have a time frame or can't commit to that just at the moment. Proposals need to be compliant with the UK Forestry Standard. So if you're not familiar with that, this is government's sort of requirements and guidelines for sustainable forestry in the UK. All our schemes, all the work that we do in the forestry sector is underpinned by the standard. So definitely need to be aware of that. We have another grant scheme that's, I guess, part of the wider Woodland Creation Offer called the Woodland Creation Planning Grant that provides support for, I guess, the due diligence required when you're creating a proposal for woodland creation. So doing all of the checks on data sets, getting out on site and having a look at things like the soil and any existing important habitats that are there. There is support for that process through the Woodland Creation Planning Grant. So that could be worth looking into if you're not familiar with that scheme. And we also assess grant applications, woodland creation proposals, all of them, whether grant funded or not, actually through the environmental impact assessment regulations. And having a UKFS compliant design plan for your proposed woodland will help your scheme through those EIA regulations. And when you make an application to Yuko, we will assess your woodland officer will assess your proposal against those regulations as part of processing the grant application. So just to be aware of UK Forestry Standard and the environmental impact assessment regulations, and do have a look at the Woodland Creation Planning Grant for financial support to go through some of those that UKFS process to make sure that you're creating the right woodland in the right place. As I say, there are other controls that we have to have on the award of grants, and we do require applicants to register with the RPA on their customer register. So I think the Rural Payment Service. So we need to have an SBI, that's a single business identifier, and a CRN, customer reference number for applicants, and that supports the due diligence checks that we have to make. And it will also help us make payments through DEFRA's preferred payment system when we come to payment processing. And using this system as well, it also allows you as our customers to sort of manage their pay details directly themselves. So, and as well as customers registering as people on RPA systems, we also need the land to be registered. That can be done through an RLE1 form with the RPA. The land needs to be registered before we can issue an agreement. So customer registration, we need that before you apply, but the land registration, you can undertake that process as we process your Yuko application. And as long as it's registered before in time before we offer an agreement, then that's fine. But we do recommend starting that land registration process before you do make an application. And the reason we've asked for that is twofold. It does the land registration process, the land register gives us a common reference point for dual funding checks, and in the fullness of time would potentially help with the integration of Yuko schemes into the environmental land management scheme. So there are reasons for all of these requirements, but yeah, customer registration up front, land registration we advise you start up front, but as long as it's registered before, it must be registered, sorry, before we can issue an agreement. Okay, so I've touched on this before, just a point that we are currently working very hard on at the moment. But at the moment, if you have land under environmental stewardship scheme, we can only accept that into Yuko if there's less than 5 months to run on the ES agreement. And at the moment, otherwise, if you don't let your ES agreement run its course and expire, there's no way that you can move land from an ES scheme into Yuko without a reclaim on the land that's being taken out of the ES agreement. Potentially, we understand that the whole ES scheme may close with a reclaim as well, and that's something that we are currently working to get clarity on at the moment. the Rural Payments Agency, though, ultimately would need to confirm any reclaim that would, well, the reclaim amount that would apply, and if any penalty might also be due. And so, yeah, just to be aware of that and to seek an indication of what reclaim amounts you might have to pay from the RPA if you want to take land out of the ES scheme and put it into Yuko. At the moment, though, there is a way to get support for woodland creation without a penalty, and that's through the Countryside Stewardship, Woodland Creation and Maintenance Scheme. But to move land from an ES agreement to that, there are still tests that have to be made to make sure that, first of all, the woodland creation will be a significant environmental impact. It's have a significant positive environmental impact, sorry, so it will be an improvement on terms of what the ES scheme is currently paying for. That's probably fairly likely if you have an entry-level scheme, but as you get into the higher level scheme where you've got options for specific features or environmental improvements, it might be, well, it will be less likely to pass that test. And the second test there is that the existing commitment is substantially reinforced, and basically what that means is that once land has been taken out of the ES scheme to go into woodland creation, there's still, I guess, enough critical mass there in the ES agreement that the remainder of the holding can remain in the ES scheme. So, as I say, by not taking land out for woodland creation, you're not compromising the whole of the ES agreement. So just to be aware of that. Something that's developing at the moment, and I'm sure we will put information out onto gov.uk and through our e-alerts when we have more updates on how Yuko works with environmental stewardship. We've worked very hard with support from DEFRA on making sure that public bodies are eligible for Yuko, and Treasury have been showed some flexibility here and been very helpful, but they have asked us to have some scheme requirements to help manage this and make sure, I guess, essentially that putting public land into Yuko is the best value for money for the taxpayer. So there are some controls on that, and so the land public bodies that are applying, they will need to clear that with their Treasury spending team before they make an application. There's also an expectation that public access is provided over those sites, at least half of those sites, unless there's good reason not to do so. And also an expectation that applicants can demonstrate that they're managing this land in conjunction with guidance on managing public money. So, as I say, ensuring that it's value for taxpayers' money and it's the best use of the land. And joint applications with private bodies are encouraged, and we'll monitor that. So I think that does suggest that in the fullness of time, there's the potential for that to become more of a mandatory requirement, that there's joint applications from public and private bodies. But as I say, at the moment, public bodies can apply for Yuko in their own right. I'm conscious of time, so I'll try and pick up the pace a little bit. So we know at the moment there is a challenge for our nursery sector to understand what the demand is for trees in terms of volume and species, and so we've sought to address this in part through our application process. So we are asking applicants to check with nurseries that the planting material they need should be available. So that's a check, an engagement with a UK nursery to confirm that, and we hope that will also help applicants understand and know whether planting material will be available from their side, as well as helping the nurseries. We have some wider work happening to try and improve the data flow to nurseries to help their planning. And biosecurity is vitally important. We know that at the moment we're encouraging but not insisting on that plants used in Yuko are from nurseries with plant healthy certification or similar. As more nurseries become assured under that scheme, that's likely to become more of a harder requirement. There's a huge amount of interest in agroforestry at the moment, but at the moment as it stands, Yuko doesn't support silvo-arable and silvo-pastoral agroforestry systems. And again, we're now looking to improve Yuko, working with DEFRA to look at how we could develop a support package for those systems now. We have, in changing those area eligibility requirements for Yuko, tried to make it so we can provide more support for trees on farms, so small woods and shelter belts. So yeah, as I say, through the smaller block size and smaller overall application area and width compared to some of our previous grant support. Yuko also supports woodland creation through natural colonisation, and we've worked hard with Natural England and DEFRA on this, and we've drawn in expertise from the England Woodland Biodiversity Group to help develop our approach here. Know that there's differing views on this, and we can only go so far within the bounds of a grant scheme to support this approach, which does have an element of risk. So we've had to set parameters, and we want to maximise the chances that this approach to woodland creation has, as I say, to protect and safeguard that taxpayers' money. So the requirements would usually expect a natural colonisation to be within 75 metres of 2 viable seed sources. We might push that up further in exceptional circumstances, but 75 metres is our default expectation. We ask applicants to complete a pre-application site assessment to determine the likely success for the scheme. And what we're looking for where natural colonisation is the approach is that after 10 years, there's at least 60% woody cover over the area and a minimum stocking of 100 tree stems per hectare. So, to say the view of the experts there is that if we have those criteria met by year 10, we can be very confident that the scheme is on the right course to create woodland. We will check the site at year 5 to make sure that the conditions remain suitable to meet those minimum requirements. So that's making sure that any fencing's in place and any temporary open space is being maintained. But the ultimate test is at year 10. Natural colonisation is eligible for support through the standard costs and annual maintenance payments, and also the additional contributions. But where we have patches of existing colonisation that are mappable and meet minimum stocking that we'd expect under a planting scheme, and also where the trees are taller than 1.2 metres, so they're sort of taller than browsing height, we would not pay additional contributions on those areas, those patches. As I say, the aim of those additional contributions is to incentivise woodland design and a location to deliver those public benefits. So if we've got patches of advanced natural colonisation there, we've concluded that there isn't a huge incentive there to award the additional contribution. Okay, I'll stop there for questions.
Fantastic. Okay, so first question. Is there a minimum area of native woodland that can be extended, e.g. 0.5 hectares, which is the minimum recognised by CS? I think that's with regards to the nature recovery additional contributions.
Yeah.
It's talking about extending.
Yeah, so I guess the minimum area for a Yuko application is the 1 hectare, and it can have those blocks of down to 0.1 hectare. So you couldn't have just half a hectare on its own and be eligible. In terms of, I guess, the extension of existing woodlands, that all comes down to that spatial targeting and that layer that we looked at with the dark khaki showing those existing areas of native woodland. And I think I'd have to check this, but my understanding is that we'd only pick up those areas as being woodland if those existing areas were greater than half a hectare. Yeah, sorry, I'm not sure I've totally answered that question, but we wouldn't go down to half a hectare for the Yuko application. It needs to have a total area of at least 1 hectare to be eligible, and that's 1 hectare of new planting.
Okay, fantastic. Next question, will this grant be compatible with the future ELM scheme?
A good question. I think all the details of ELM's still to be finalised, but as far as we can, we're keeping in touch with its development with the aim that this is compatible. And so, for example, we hope that we've worked to get the payment design for those for the maintenance payments right, so that they can feed into ELM in the future. So yeah, our intention would be that it's as compatible as possible. But yeah, until the details of ELM fully emerge, probably can't be 100% confident of that. But yeah, we want Yuko to fit in alongside and move into ELM, have the potential to move into ELM in the future.
Okay, so we've got a few questions coming in about carbon. Yeah, a good one here. If you obtain a high grant payment for the new Yuko, will you still be eligible for carbon funding as per the additionality rules? Are there any thresholds?
I can't answer that definitively, I'm afraid. So where carbon is concerned, or the Woodland Carbon Code has 4 additionality tests, and you'd have to check how your scheme sort of stacked up against those. One of those is an additionality check for financing. So again, you'd have to sort of work out how you could, check that you meet those additionality requirements. I think the Carbon Code's requirements have been broadened out, so you can look at the costs of woodland creation over a longer time frame. And I would also say that while this is hopefully an attractive offer and much more generous than we've been able to offer before, we've done a lot of work to model these grant rates, and there are expectations that we don't pay grants that in general result in more than the costs of woodland creation, and so that has been a consideration in setting these rates. So there's two things there really. We've got to make sure the fund goes as far as it can to create as much woodland as possible, so we've got to spread it a long way, and also, as I say, there's that constraint that we shouldn't be paying more than the costs of woodland creation, and so we've aimed to do that, and so I hope you would have a reasonable chance of being able to show that you can meet that financial additionality test, even though our grant payments have increased. But I'd have to sort of say, do have a look at your individual scheme and how it stacks up against the Carbon Code and its criteria.
Fantastic, thanks Alec, that was a tricky one. So I'll just ask one last question now before we move on. And that is, how will UK be promoted through farming and landowner networks, and how can local authorities support this locally?
A good question, and we're starting to look now at how we can effectively promote the scheme, and I think if anyone has any suggestions about routes that we could take or should be looking at, yeah, please perhaps put them into the meeting chat. But we do have a team that are looking at how we can promote Yuko and other support for trees and woodlands through the Nature for Climate Fund. So there's probably still a bit of work to do on that. But if you think there are any bits of information or tools that we can provide to local authorities or other land advisors, then yeah, we'd really love to hear that. I think when we can look to develop those things to help others sort of spread the word about the grant scheme.
Great. Okay, so that's it for now. Moving on.
Okay, right. Sorry, folks, I have overrun today. I think we're into sort of the last sort of section though, and I just wanted to talk very briefly about scoring. So again, the award of grant funds is an expectation, and not unreasonably so, that we're making the best possible use of it. And one of the ways that we can demonstrate that is through a scoring system. And so Yuko is competitive, and it does have scoring. And there are two levels to the scoring. The first is at the project level, based on the overall design of the project and how it's financed. And then the second level is at the compartment level, and that's based on the public benefits that the scheme will provide. And the final score is based on the sum of those two levels. The minimum level, the minimum threshold, and the way the scoring works is that your project will need to meet or exceed a threshold score, and that score will be reviewed periodically and updated. But at the moment, the minimum, the threshold is 10 points, and you can get your points at either the project or the compartment level. So, just very briefly to run through the scores at the project level, we have some points available for species diversity. So we're trying to encourage here the use of a greater range of species in woodlands to provide resilience to climate change and also pests and diseases. So that's where you can score points. We also have points available for planting species that we know or we believe will grow well in future climatic conditions. So again, that's trying to build in resilience to climate change and also ensure that these schemes are effective in terms of their carbon storage. And so the way to get those points is to check your site and your proposed species using the ecological site classification system, which you can access online. Again, if you go to gov.uk or Google and you search for ecological site classification, that will bring up the details of that system. We do encourage applicants to dig some soil pits and actually check the types of soil on their sites to put in the very best information into that system to get the very best results out of it. There are also a significant number of points for private finance. So where you have a scheme that would be eligible for an additional contribution, but you choose to forgo that and take up private finance, then you can get a significant number of points for that. And then also we have some, up to a degree, some points for size, recognising that bigger schemes are usually better in terms of delivering those public benefits. But there's only points up to a certain limit. I think 15 hectares. You get if you're planting over 15 hectares. Sorry, you get a flat rate of extra points for that. But we don't want to necessarily penalise, if you like, smaller schemes. So we've tried to keep our points for size sort of managed, if that makes sense, so we can compare large and small schemes in a fair way. And then at the compartment level, the scores are really just based around those additional contributions and also, as I say, the potential benefit in terms of air quality to capture ammonia and protect triple SIs. So the application form will calculate the points at this level for you. And as I say, it's all based around those additional contributions, and the scores generally reflect the value of the additional contribution. And the value of those additional contributions is based on research and evidence on how society values these benefits. So that's their origin, and that's how this weighting's come about. But as I say, as you work through our application form, it will automatically apply the scores at the compartment level for you. Okay, so just to sort of summarise, I mean, hopefully that does show there's a lot to get through there, and yeah, sorry I've overrun a little bit there, but hopefully it shows us that flexibility with this scheme to look at smaller planting areas. We've got the support for natural colonisation in there, and hopefully a fairly flexible payment framework there with those different strands, if you like, and also the optional additional contributions. And then in terms of being supportive, again, hopefully you've seen there the sort of the uplift in terms of potential payments per hectare compared to our existing schemes through that move to 100% support for standard costs, the retained compatibility with the basic payment scheme, that actual cost support for infrastructure, and crucially those stackable additional contributions. And yeah, Annie, you've shared that question about promotion. That's something that we're now turning our attention to now that the scheme's out there. And we want to develop some more material to support the scheme, perhaps some case studies, toolkits to support decision making. And so that will be our next step. And as I say, if anyone has any thoughts, they can put into the chat on that, or would be willing to email in to the email address that's here. We'd be really pleased to hear from you. Right, I will stop there, and we can stop and perhaps pick over some more questions, Annie. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Alec. Okay, we've had a couple of questions in on the same topic. So this is about banking for natural capital. So can woodland planted under the scheme then be banked by a company or landowner as part of natural capital? So, for example, for future biodiversity net gain?
I don't think I can answer that question for you at the moment, I'm afraid. That interaction with natural capital and biodiversity net gain, the detail of that we're still working through. So I think we have had quite a few questions about this, and I think we need to draw together an information note on that. So I'm afraid I couldn't answer that right now, and I'm not sure we're quite there yet with maybe net gain to be able to answer that just at the moment. Yeah, apologies. I think that's an action for us to put out some more guidance on Yuko's interaction with net gain.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next question. Can a farmer who has other land within a mid or higher tier stewardship scheme on use Yuko on land with no options or payments on it?
Yes, that should be possible where there's no options or payments on the land parcel. I guess for environmental stewardship at the entry level scheme level, where it's usually the whole holding that's in that scheme, the land would need to be released from that entry level scheme. But I think, yeah, if you have a countryside stewardship agreement on part of the holding, but you've got land parcels that are free of any mid-tier or higher tier options, then there should be no conflict there with Yuko.
Okay, next question. Maintenance will not cover the cost of removing and disposal of tree shelters. This cost is high. Recontrol is also expensive. Why is only £200 per hectare offered?
Yeah, so again, this has come up before. I mean, that is our current payment rate. I appreciate those comments around weed control and also collecting the tree shelters. I mean, I guess my response to that would be that it is only a contribution to the costs. So appreciate it might not cover everything. And I guess hopefully though, I guess over the course of the 10 years of those maintenance payments, maybe the type of activity that you're undertaking will shift. And so I agree, you know, in those early years, there could be a lot more intensive weed control needed. But then hopefully once your trees are above the sward height and established, hopefully the amount of maintenance you need to do will decrease until, and then you get to the end of the scheme, and hopefully then perhaps you have a bit more of a reserve through those annual payments to support the removal and disposal of any tree shelters that you've used. So yeah, I guess the bottom line is I'm afraid we can only go so far with the payments, and at the moment that £200 per hectare per year is our contribution to those maintenance costs.
Okay, we've had a suggestion here. So what about an incentive for farmers to grow and supply saplings for the scheme to fill potential shortfall?
That sounds an interesting idea, and we have, I guess we've got a lot of projects that are happening at the moment to encourage woodland creation, and one of them is looking at sector capacity. I guess that's probably more focused on support for nurseries, but perhaps that's something we will pass that on to that project team that are looking at how we can increase capacity for seedling supply. So yeah, thank you for that.
Okay, a question about natural colonisation. So it says that 75 metres from 2 seed sources. What constitutes a seed source?
A good question, and we probably need again some more guidance on this. But I guess we'd be looking for trees that are of an age that means that they will bear seed. I think that's my sort of very simplistic answer. And I guess we also want to make sure that they're trees that align with the land manager's objectives for the site. But perhaps again, something we need to sort of just take away and flesh that guidance out a bit more. We are working on at the moment, some wider guidance on natural colonisation and using it that's wider than just the grant. So I think there'll be more information that we can draw on and apply to Yuko from that. But I guess yeah, we're looking for healthy trees of seed bearing age, really. That's my off the top of my head answer, but yeah, more detail on that to come. And of course you'll get support with Yuko from a woodland officer, so they will perhaps be able to advise you a bit further on specific sites.
Okay, here is another one. It says, it seems a missed opportunity that agroforestry is not included. What is the reason for this?
There's no real reason other than than the time constraints we were under to draw the scheme together and launch it. We've got a bit more work we would have to do to I guess to pull together the evidence base for grant payments for agroforestry, and that's something that we're now turning our attention to. So agree, I think ideally we would have liked to include agroforestry schemes, but we could only do so much in the time and the capacity we had, and that's very much now our focus now with DEFRA is to look at how we support agroforestry. But yeah, take that point and recognise there's a huge amount of interest in agroforestry systems at the moment that we need to look at to help meet our policy aims, definitely.
Thanks, Alec. Just to let you know, we have had 100 questions come in throughout the webinar. So we've managed to answer about almost 60 in the chat. So we're just working through a few more now here. I've got a few minutes left for questions. So next one. When scoring the design, what, if any, weight is given to compliance with UKFS landscape and woodland design principles? For example, how well the proposed woodland would fit into the landscape?
There's no specific weighting for that, and I guess, you know, to be honest, as I say, we expect compliance with UKFS as the baseline. So we will be looking for consideration of the landscape impact as part of the basic scheme design. There's no specific scores or points for that. But yeah, it's still a process that we'd be looking for you to go through to make sure your scheme is compliant with the UK forestry standard, and it's probably also something that might crop up through the environmental impact assessment as well. So yeah, it's sort of, yeah, we'd expect to see that, but there's no weighting and no scoring of points for that, I'm afraid.
Okay, they keep coming in.
Oh,
Is it anticipated that Yuko will continue beyond 2023?
That's our hope. and I guess we will look at the level of uptake, and that will hopefully make the case that the scheme continues. But yeah, that's our hope. We've got 33 applications so far and over 200 hectares of applications at the moment. So the interest is significant, and that's coming through now as real applications. So, as I say, the more successful the scheme is, the more confident we will be that it runs on after March 2023. I guess at the moment we've got to go through a spending review process as well, so we just have to be aware of that. But yeah, at the minute we can only commit to the end of March 2023, but hopefully it will be a success, and we will have good grounds to go through to for the next 4 years.
Okay, thank you. Another interesting question that's come up here is, as a contractor with the capability to provide much of the creation, management and ongoing maintenance, would there be any assistance from FE to incorporate Yuko works into our offer? Or would our local FE team be able to assist with promotion of contractors that are already working with FE to land managers for the 3 quotes? So I can repeat that if you like. It's a long question.
Yeah, sorry, Annie, if you could. It sounds like
Sure.
there's quite a lot in that. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to cover it all. We need a panel for this, don't we? We need more than me. But yeah, can you repeat that? Sorry.
Sure. As a contractor with the capability to provide much of the creation, management and ongoing maintenance, would there be any assistance from FE to incorporate Yuko works into our offer? Or would our local FE team be able to assist with promotion of contractors that already work with FE to land managers for the 3 quotes?
Okay, I think it's probably more of the latter there, that we could perhaps look to help promote the contractors and agents who can support land managers through the UCO process, and I'd have to sort of check with our area teams, but I think in the past I know they have drawn together directories of contractors and agents who can help land managers through our grant and regulatory processes, and we'd always encourage that land managers take up that support. So I think that would probably be the way to approach your local forest services team, perhaps rather than Forestry England. So Forest Services deal with the private woodland side of the Forestry Commission's work. So speak to them about any agent or contractor directory that they have, so that you could be added to that directory, which can then be shared with land managers who are interested and looking for support from agents and contractors to do the work.
Great, thank you, Alec. Okay, just a couple more now, I think. Open space has not come up in the questions, I don't think. Can you summarise the rules and guidance related to open space, as this will be of interest?
Oh, I can try. So I think we will allow open space in UCO. Our expectation is that the open space is like an integral part of the woodland design, and that's been common to countryside stewardship schemes before, but we would allow that portion of open space to increase, I think up to 40% in specific circumstances where there's a clear sort of biodiversity benefit and reason for that, but the sort of the default expectation we have is there's 20%, but it could be higher, as I say, in exceptional circumstances where there's good reason, and ultimately that would need to be agreed and signed off by your woodland officer. And I'll ask my colleague Rachel if she has any thoughts on that to maybe put them in a quick message to me. But that's 20% default, but potentially up to 40% in exceptional circumstances where agreed with the woodland officer.
Okay, and then another comment to flag. Not a question, but would it be possible to flag to this audience that both Community Forests and Woodland Trust have additional nature for climate funding for tree planting? This can be used in a variety of scenarios, potentially where Yuko isn't eligible. Get in touch with your local community forest or woodland trust officer for more information.
Great, thanks Annie, and thanks for that comment. And I would add, you know, we've been working very hard on the development and launch of Yuko, and that's today's sort of presentation. But we know we have some more work to do, as I say, to work with our delivery partners for Nature for Climate Fund to pull together advice and information that helps guide land managers to the best offer for them, and that could very well be support through one of our delivery partners, such as in the Northern Forest, for example. So yeah, there are other offers for woodland creation out there. Definitely, good point.
Okay, thank you. I was just double checking for any last questions, and the team have notified me of one other. Okay, what's the widest spacing that trees could be planted to be eligible for Yuko?
Okay, so we are typically looking for broadleaf planting 11,000. 1,100 stems per hectare for broadleaves and up to 2,500 for conifers, if I remember right. So I guess we're looking at a 3 meter spacing roughly for broadleaves and 2 for conifers. We will, I think, in certain situations allow lower stocking densities of 400 stems per hectare. Again, that would be in exceptional circumstances where there's a specific biodiversity aim there. So I guess I'm thinking particularly there around, you know, creating feathered edges for a woodland design. But yeah, I think our default would probably be those fairly common expectations of 1,100 for broadleaves and then 2,500 for conifers. And then just a note on that, actually, that we wouldn't, in terms of our support for the actual capital items of supplying and planting a tree, we would only pay up to that maximum stocking of 2,500. So that would be another cap, if you like, that we would apply to the support for standard costs.
Okay, potentially our last question, depending on how long this takes to answer, I guess. We're almost out of time. Thank you for pointing out the non-natives list in Part B of the application. Is there a maximum proportion that non-natives can form in the newly created woodland?
So again, it's going to come down to the design requirements. So I guess again, the minimum requirement is that you comply with UK forestry standard, which has certain expectations on the proportion of broadleaf species and areas planted for conservation. And then in terms of Yuko, again, you'd have to check the design requirements for the additional contributions. So it's UKFS compliance is the baseline, and then we do have some higher expectations in terms of design where you're going for the additional contributions. I'm just trying to think through in terms of non-natives. So you could be planting non-natives for the social benefits, for the water benefits apart from the riparian planting. And then for the nature recovery payments, as I say, they are focused, unless you're planting for red squirrel, on new native woodland, but there is potential in the definition of new native woodland for up to 20% of non-natives. Yeah, there's flexibility in there, but it's probably just worth sort of working through the design requirements for the additional contributions. That's where perhaps it gets a bit more, a little bit more detailed, and we've just sort of lifted the bar from basic UKFS compliance. I'm not sure I've answered that very well. Sorry. yeah, check the design requirements. UKFS as the minimum in terms of the species mix, and then, as I say, yeah, check the design requirements for any additional contributions you might be looking to get.
Thank you, Alec. You've done a great job. That's lots of questions. Unfortunately, there are still quite a few questions we haven't been able to get to. So I would reiterate, please do send in any unanswered questions to the email address that you see on the screen now. Unfortunately, we've run out of time for any more questions today, but please do get in touch and we'll do our best to respond to you as soon as possible. Also, just note, lots of people have been asking about having access to the recording and to the slides. When I can't commit that these will be published online at the moment. So what we're saying is, if you're really keen to access these, please do again send us an email and we can send you a link. So other than that, I think we're just left to say thank you ever so much for joining us today and spending a whole hour and a half listening to everything Yuko. I don't know whether, Alec, you had a few final words you wanted to say.
And I think everyone's had enough from me, haven't they? But yeah, thanks for chairing, Annie, and the team for working behind the scenes to pull this together and manage the questions. And yeah, thank you. Appreciate an hour and a half's a long time to take. And yeah, thanks for bearing with me. And yeah, I hope it was useful for you. And that yeah, you'll consider Yuko and woodland creation on your land, or you'll advise your clients or yeah, your clients to of the offer, and perhaps they can take it up. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.